Now, a White House official said on Friday that Silicon Valley can help the U.S. government save up to $1 trillion over 10 years by cutting costs and improving services, calling it an economic opportunity. Professor Simon, why is the Trump administration so keen on reaching out for Silicon Valley's help?
Well, it seems to me that President Trump is looking to fulfill the mandate that he brought to Washington, which was to make government more efficient and allow the government to perform at a much higher level. And that includes, for President Trump, perhaps becoming a paperless administration where the bureaucracy will improve its performance. It includes things like improving cybersecurity, which is obviously is not only a national issue, but a growing international issue. And also, in effect, to make the government a much more leaner and meaner, organization, and to get the fat out of the bureaucracy. And I think that's one of the mandates he brought with him when he came to Washington, D.C.
Mr. Mok, what do you see as the significance in Trump grasping the so-called economic opportunity, and what do you expect the tech CEOs to gain out of these meetings?
Well, I think the economic opportunity seeing is enormous. If we look at the size of the federal budget, it's $3.8 trillion, that's with a T. And just the defense budget alone is almost $600 billion a year. So if we look at savings of $1 trillion over 10 years, that in fact, while in absolute terms is a very large number, in the overall spending of the federal government, which represents about 20% of GDP, it's an enormous business opportunity for these tech CEOs. And as Professor Simon was saying, because of a lot of the inefficiency and even fraud and other issues with the federal government, that there's enormous potential opportunities for greater efficiency for the government as well.
Now, cybersecurity is said to be on the Tech Week agenda, and is also one that could well be of special interest for Trump, as he himself has been on the receiving end of allegations about Russian hacking of the U.S. election. Professor Simon, how vulnerable is the U.S. legacy system to cyber threats, and how urgent it is for Trump to get advice from these tech CEOs to fix these potential loopholes?
Well, as you may know, there's a tension right now in the United States between national security concerns and privacy concerns, and trying to find the balance between those two ends of the spectrum is a difficult one. I think it's extremely urgent for the Trump administration to make progress on cybersecurity. I think, like many countries, the U.S. feels a high degree of vulnerability, and I think at this point in time, if nothing is done or the Trump administration delays and then there is an event of some sort like has occurred in the U.S. election, I think that there's going to be political repercussions that could affect him even more negatively than where we are right now.
Mr. Mok, what can these tech CEOs offer in terms of the help that President Trump needs in terms of cybersecurity?
Well, I think these tech CEOs, in particular companies like Apple, like Google, and like Microsoft, can first of all offer technology. So they spend enormous sums on R&D in general, but security, cybersecurity is a huge issue for them, particularly around encryption type technologies. I think that's one thing they can certainly provide. I think the other thing they can provide as well is just the organizational expertise. How do you motivate, organize groups of people to actually implement and use that technology? So those are, I think, two very critical resources or assets that Silicon Valley can bring to the Trump administration and the federal government in general.
Now, the potential is great. However, the two sides have not been seeing each other eye to eye. For instance, Trump has tried a number of times to reinstate his immigration policy, while tech companies continue trying to hire foreign talents. In addition, many tech leaders decided to leave the White House various advisory councils after Trump's announced withdrawal from the Paris Climate Accord. Mr. Mok, to what extent might Trump's controversial policies reshape the tech companies' business scope?
Well, I think certainly Silicon Valley CEOs tend to be more on the progressive side of the political spectrum, at least in their public statements. But let's not forget, too, that almost all of these companies are publicly listed companies, And as CEOs, they have a fiduciary responsibility to their shareholders to maximize the enterprise value of their companies. And when opportunities such as President Trump is offering, and Jared Kushner as well, to help reinvent government by making it technologically more advanced, these are billion, maybe even trillion-dollar business opportunities that I would think no publicly listed tech company can pass up, despite whatever personal reservations these CEOs may have.
Ahead of his Monday meeting with President Trump, Apple CEO Tim Cook pointed out numerous ways he disagrees with Trump, but stated that he cares deeply about America. Cook said America is more important than bloody politics. Professor Simon, how do you see such a contradiction where tech leaders opt to engage in a tech week while opposing Trump, possibly on a personal level, but still opposing Trump and even openly?
Well, I think everyone recognizes that with every opportunity there comes some consequences, and I think that these companies clearly want, as Mr. Mok said, take advantage of the huge business opportunity presented by this effort to increase the performance of government. But I think that they also feel a social responsibility, and I think that it's very, very important to understand that their goal is simply to take a stand on these issues while at the same time trying to figure out ways to work with the government. As Tim Cook said, we are all Americans, and I think that as Americans we want to see the country move forward, and they want to try to find a way how not only to make their companies successful, but make the American economy perform at a higher level.
But do you think it is, I mean, it's an okay start, it's a good start, but do you think their mission is likely to succeed for both sides, Professor Simon?
I think, you know, it's a really a tough call. I mean, I think that I think that tech companies are going to have an uphill battle, and the reason why it's going to be uphill is that the Trump administration has behaved sometimes in very unpredictable ways. And so, if there was a sense of consistency in policy and a sense of consistency in direction, I think that they would feel much more confident about offering him even more support. But right now, I think they still are walking on eggshells, wondering in which direction the administration is going to move, and whether or not there's going to be a coherent policy that they could support in the coming months and years ahead.
Mr. Mok, how optimistic are you about the future prospects or, you know, the future cooperation between the two sides? We are seeing a start, but in order for both sides to really stick to each other and work things out, what would have to happen?
Well, I think, you know, the economic logic of this is impeccable, but the obstacles are daunting. So first of all, I think this notion of a deep state is not a fanciful one, in that the bureaucracy acts in its own interest and has self-preservation instincts. We've seen reports where the Pentagon, the Department of Defense, has realized it's actually impossible to even audit the Department of Defense despite a multi-year effort. So this bureaucracy is something that has to be tamed. I think Professor Simon makes a good point about the social responsibility element of a CEO's job, and all of these CEOs also need to balance the views and the preferences of their employees as well, which makes this a tricky proposition. So, and I think lastly, a lot of these controversies we're seeing, I think to a degree, are also media generated, and there's this unholy alliance between the deep state and mainstream media that is making it very hard, I think, in general, for the Trump administration to achieve its policy goals. So when we look at these obstacles, I think they are very daunting. I hope he will be successful. You know, there's plenty of room for efficiency and improvement in the government, and if he is successful, I think that will be good for all Americans.
Yeah. 1 minute left. Professor Simon, how do you see President Trump shaping up his technology policy in the whole process, if we can see any pattern at all?
Well, that's another difficult challenge. Right now, we have not seen an appointment for the director of the Office of Science and Technology Policy at the White House, and there clearly is a vacuum there. And I think people are trying to understand in what direction, both internationally and domestically, the U.S. is going to move. And so if every initiative is something that comes out almost spontaneously, without a plan, without a strategy, I think there's going to be a hard road ahead, and I think we're going to see a lot of bumps in that road as we go down it.
Let's wait and see. Thank you very much, the two gentlemen, for Professor Denis Simon, Executive Vice Chancellor of Duke Kunshan University, and Andy Mok, founder of Red Pagoda Resources. Now, here is my first point, and I still believe the list of attendees reads like a who's who in the high-tech industry, with notable exceptions. No doubt, as a sop to the companies themselves, one of the topics for discussion includes the U.S. work visa program, since this affects tech companies trying to hire foreign talents. But the tech leaders have been accused of hypocrisy after many castigated the president for pulling out of the Paris Climate Accord. Apple's Tim Cook, for instance, said he was attending because he cared deeply about America. Those of a more cynical mindset might add that there is a huge amount of money to be made for tech companies willing to be seen to be helpful to the administration. Nevertheless, one of the good things to come out of this is likely to be the fact that Donald Trump is sitting down with industry experts and listening to their advice. That in itself should give cause for optimism, as taking advice is not something this president has been known for. Those same cynics are now adding that, ironically, all Trump needs to do now in order for his technology week to be a success is to stay off Twitter, so that his lawyers don't need to run damage control and directly contradict everything he says.